Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here and such an honor to have this platform at this critical time in our history. I was sure that this was going to be a topic that I would not have to cover. I've been following American elections and politics for a long time, and I did not expect the outcome of this election. For me, it was almost unthinkable. It's impossible. And so when it came out, when on election day I found out the outcome, I was incredibly devastated. I went into almost shock. I was very angry, very upset, and very worried. And after I went through those different emotions, I realized that this was what Allah had chosen for our country and for our community, and that it was okay to take time and be angry and sad and worried and even fearful, but that we had to also move on and channel those emotions into action, into a different way of approaching how we engage. The topic that I was asked to speak to you about was our strategy moving forward. And it's very easy for me to jump into the political strategy because there's so much to talk about. But I think that we fail every time when we start there. I want to first talk to you about our individual strategy, our family strategy, our community strategy, our alliances, and then what we do on the political platform. Because until we do our internal spiritual homework, until we do the homework that has to happen inside our community, fortifying our community for what is to come, we will not succeed, brothers and sisters. And it's not that these things happen in sequence. They have to happen all at the same time because we don't have time. The first thing we have to do, brothers and sisters, is we have to fortify our hearts. When I say that, I mean that it has become normalized, it has become acceptable to assault us psychologically. We are enduring psychological violence. And a lot of times people tell me that I am stating things too harshly, that I'm making people feel bad or worried. But I think that we don't have time to skirt around the issues, and I certainly don't have time to sugarcoat anything for you. When you look at the media coverage of Islam and Muslims, in a recent study, it was 90% negative. The only question I have is not why there is Islamophobia on the street level, but why there isn't more of it. And why there isn't more of it is a testimony to the inherent hope and in many cases goodness of the American people. So we are enduring this violence on our identity every single day, and our children are enduring so much at their schools. So what do we have to do to create a strategy for the coming era? We have to fortify against this assault. And the way to fortify against this assault is to love deeply and passionately everything that is being degraded. I used to think that Islamophobia, anti-Muslim rhetoric, and the demonization of Islam was primarily targeting non-Muslims to marginalize the Muslim community in America. And I think actually that is a secondary goal. I think your hearts and my hearts are actually the primary goal of Islamophobic rhetoric. To make you and I doubt, to make you and I ashamed of who we are and what we believe. To make us feel like grateful guests in our own country. You and I, brothers and sisters, and our children are the primary targets of anti-Muslim rhetoric. Non-Muslims are a secondary target. So you have to protect your heart and not actually believe that you are immune to the toxic wasteland that is the political discourse of our country right now. You are not immune. You can internalize Islamophobia just like anyone else. So you have to develop a daily practice of renewing your love for Allah and His Prophet. It is not enough to be casually Muslim. It is no longer enough to do the minimum. And I am reminding myself first. We have to run to what affirms our faith. We have to practice and learn what deepens our love, because that is the only thing that will fortify against the hate. Listen and reflect on the Quran. Choose one ayah a day and write about it in your journal. These are very simple things. Find a podcast you like and make a practice of listening to 15 minutes a day about the Prophet's life, alayhi salatu salam. You cannot love someone you don't know. You don't know intimately. Think of the people you love. Think of your family. Think of your spouse or your best friend or your children. There is something called a love map. The details of who they are, the details of what matters to them. And if you're not familiar with these details, your love for them is shallow. It is not intimate. So you cannot love Allah and His Prophet without getting to know the details and thinking about them deeply. That is how love grows, and that is how you protect your heart against the hate. So get to know your faith in a whole new way. That's how we fortify our hearts. We have to fortify our families, brothers and sisters. Did you know that after 9/11, there was a surge in domestic violence among Arab Americans? And the only reason I'm saying Arab Americans is because that's what the study looked at. It didn't do a Muslim American study. It was focused on Arabs. And this is very common. Families break down when there is stress on the individuals in the families because of external powers, external stresses. The social and political forces that we think are just on the outside, they seep and they come into our families. Divorces went up right after 9/11 among these same families, the Arab American community. So we have to fortify our families against this. First of all, and this is incredibly important, by implementing a zero-tolerance policy of domestic violence when it comes to our masajid. And second, we have to take these things seriously. We have to seek help. There is no shame in mental health. In seeking mental health help. There is no shame. And I was talking to friends of mine who are in the mental health field, and they said that from their own practice, just in their own practice, the level of anxiety and depression among Muslims, just since the election, has risen. They have actually seen it go up. So to protect our families, we have to take care of ourselves. And seeking mental health assistance is incredibly important. And there is absolutely no shame in this. We have to train our imams in as much as we can to address mental health issues within the community as much as they are trained, and then to know when to refer people to professionals, whether it comes to individuals, or counseling couples. So we have to fortify our hearts, we have to fortify our families, we have to take care of ourselves. Then at the masjid level, we have to do at least two things. First, we have to get our houses in order in terms of the minutia of legalities, our 501c3 status. And here's why. Because according to every lawyer I've talked to, they believe that what they're going to come after us with is not a gun, but a pen. It's going to be in the form of IRS audits, and it's going to be completely constitutional. They're going to close down our mosques by auditing them. And if things aren't in order, those mosques, they can continue to run, but they lose their 501c3 status, which means it's going to make it very hard for those masajid and those schools and those organizations to raise money. Because you can't give your donors a receipt that says they donated to a charity, a nonprofit. So we have to get our masajid in order as a key action point. But the second thing we have to do is we have to get our masajid in order on the community level. Because right now, our masajid are fractured, many of them. And many people feel very alienated in our masajid. I did a study with the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, ISPU, where I direct research on creating inclusive, engaging, welcoming masajid. And we just came out with this study, and I encourage you, this is a resource for the community. I encourage you to go to the website and read the recommendations of how to make our masajid places where everyone feels welcomed, where we come together as a community and we belong. We have no more time for the fracturing in our community, for the way that we sometimes treat each other, for the way that we sometimes exclude each other. And this is especially the case when it comes to a few groups, and I'm going to be very blunt, when it comes to women, how they feel in our masajid, and when it comes to Black Muslims and non-Muslim and non-Black Muslim, predominantly Arab or Desi masajid. I have heard stories that break my heart, brothers and sisters. We have to deal with intra-Muslim racial tension. We don't have a choice. It should have been done decades ago. If we're not actively addressing this issue in our communities, then we are part of the problem. Because racism is something that we all have absorbed by being here. If we're not actively acting against it, then it's seeping into the way we think. And we are fracturing our community. 1/3 of our community, a full 1/3 of our community, are African Americans. 10% of African Americans are Muslim. And yet, when we, as the collective we, as Muslims, want to do outreach, we normally do what we call interfaith outreach, which is very good, and I think we have to continue to do that. But interfaith normally, though we may not intend this, ends up being with suburban churches and synagogues that are predominantly white. And we are engaging the dominant culture. And we very seldom, of course there are many exceptions, but we very seldom as local communities reach out to African American and Latino communities. And yet these are our natural allies collectively as Muslims, and they are of course part of our community already. This has to change. So we have to fortify and strengthen our masajid. We have to heal as a community in terms of the fracturing between people. and then on the political front. And yet, and again, I want to emphasize, these are not in sequence. They are all things we have to do at the same time. My advice to you is this. I want to tell you, the biggest thing I learned from the past 8 years engaging with the Obama administration is this. Muslims under this last administration did not lack access. We did not lack access. We had lots and lots of access to high-level people in the Obama administration, alhamdulillah. But we did lack influence. Because access and influence aren't the same thing. We think they're the same thing, but they're actually totally not the same thing. The only way to have actual influence is to combine access with organization. You have to organize on the ground and come to the table with something to offer and basically something to threaten with. If you don't have any leverage, if you don't have any political and social capital that you have done the hard work of building, before you come to that table, your access is not impactful. It doesn't translate into influence. Engagement without that homework is not effective. And I would say that even with the Obama administration. I would say that 1,000 times over with the current administration. My perspective is not that we boycott, but my perspective is that we engage with the proper thought through. First, we have to begin by building political and social capital on the ground level, by engaging local elected officials, even at the city level, at the state level, building coalitions of other concerned Americans about our civil liberties and the civil liberties and the justice for all Americans. Did you know, and I've said this before, perhaps to the same conference, did you know that according to our research at ISPU, the same legislators, the same people who are proposing anti-Sharia legislation, this law against something no one is trying to do, just to create fear and hatred of Muslims. Anti-Sharia legislation, the same legislators who are proposing this kind of legislation with an 80% overlap are also proposing legislation that restricts the rights of African Americans and Latinos in the form of voter ID and voter suppression laws, that restricts the rights of unions, that restricts the rights of immigrants and others. So those who want to restrict our rights already see a commonality between us as the Muslim community overall and other ethnic minorities and other movements. Isn't it time that we also work to create political coalitions against this common threat? Isn't that logical? At the state level. Because if we don't build from the ground up, even if we were to have access, it would be 100% useless, in my opinion, from everything I've seen. So we have to build from the ground up. And this is something every single one of us can do. You can engage your local elected official at the city, at the county, and at the state level. Right now I live in California, and California has really been leading the country as a state in saying we will not carry out any mandate that says we're going to deport everybody who's undocumented. They have passed a resolution about that. They have passed a resolution that is basically the protection of California values, that they will resist these proposals that have been promised that would exclude so many people. You can create a similar, especially in states that are, predominantly Democrat. But even if they're not, you can create a situation where you can protect your local community by engaging local officials. It's not all at the federal level, and it's absolutely not all at the executive level. And I'll close with this. We have to engage Congress. Actually, incredibly, with earnest energy right now. You may have heard that Obama did away with this program called NSEERS. And it's a program that basically required people from certain countries, most of them Muslim except for North Korea, to register with the government. And it wasn't being used since 2011, and then he just did away with it. And everybody celebrated that, which is a victory. But it can be reinstated with an executive order, which would be bad. But what would be far worse if it was reinstated through an actual legislation through Congress. Then it would be almost, it would be very, very hard to get rid of. An executive order, another president can get rid of. But a law that goes through the normal channels in Congress is much, much harder. So what we need to do is to defend ourselves against that route, the legislative route. And the way to do that is every single one of you has an elected official, has a congressman or woman that you can call and encourage to vote against anything that comes resembling NSEERS in Congress. So I'm going to sum up. The coming 4 years are going to be very difficult for our community. Anyone who is insane enough to say, oh, we don't know, give him a chance, has not been listening. Because he has already said what he plans to do, and then has backed up those promises with very specific appointments, at least in the transition team. So to sit back and wait is insane. We have to get ready for what's to come. And it's much better. Everything I'm saying we should do anyway. We should do regardless. But now the time is urgent. And maybe this is a gift that Allah is giving us, because we have been asleep for too long, brothers and sisters. But after all my anger at the outcome, I am finally at the place where I'm filled with hope. I'm really filled with hope because due to the urgency, we will finally get done what we should have been doing all along. And I believe with all of my heart that with God's help, we can do this. Thank you.